Good morning, all of you. We were discussing about Kausalya, and so far we discussed about Kausalyan views on education, his views on management, his views on leadership, his views on governance, his views on human resource development, then his views on social structure. And today we will discuss about two important aspects, and here we will, close your, Kautilya. And those two important aspect is that aspect on education and aspect on state, right? Though in your course only, the state is there, uh, but all these aspects are also, very relevant uh, to have a better understanding of Kautilyan views of, state. The state performs all these functions. Right? So far as this economy is concerned, to Kautilya, that institution of private property and the state ownership can coexist. Both can exist. The state claimed ownership of common resources such as water and all residual property. What is this residual property? In Arthashastra, residual property means the disputed but unsettled private claim to the property. So disputed and unsettled private property is the residual property, and state is having ownership on the residual property. State is having ownership on water, right? The king maintains the diversified economy efficiently and profitably, right? So, it is important. Right? Today, we talk about the mixed economy. And in the mixed economy or welfare state, you will find the existence of both private sector and public sector. And Kautilya, in his time, he has given the sense that coexistence of private property and state owners. So king is to maintain both this economy relating to the private property because there is taxation, and economy related to the public property efficiently and profitably, so that maximum uh, you know resources can be put in the state's treasury. Land, mining, fishing were all both in the state and private ownership. So both private individual and the state can have land, can have mining, fishing. However, the state the monopolizes existed in gold, silver, and liquor. But so far as economy related to the gold, silver, and liquor is concerned, the state has a monopoly over it. No private individual can, have a business of gold, silver, and liquors. These are the, uh, precious things. One gets the impression from the Arthashastra that the economy was predominantly agrarian. Right? Because at that time there was no industry. Mostly it was agrarian economy, and uh, the lifestyle and the culture was also agrarian. Now in the Arthashastra, land is considered as the first pillar of economy. There are three pillars of economy in the Arthashastra. First is the land, second is the animal husbandry, and third is the trade. Three pillars of economy. Now there are two kinds of land. One is the crown land, other is the private land. Right? Crown land means basically it is a state land. Right? So far as this crown land is concerned, either it is cultivated directly under the administration of the chief superintendent of crown, or let out to share croppers at the rate of 1/4 or 1/5 of the harvest, going to the tiller if they invest only on labor, and 1/2 if they contribute all inputs. So far as this crown land is concerned, either there will be a supervisor, superintendent, that superintendent will supervise over the cultivation of the land. The supervisor has the responsibility to cultivate the supervisor has the responsibility to uh, uh, you know uh, cultivate this crown land. This is one way of cultivating the crown land. And the second way is that the land will be shared with the croppers, those who are uh, farming, or those who are going to farm uh, the, the land. If the farmer or the cropper, if they put only their labor, then uh, they will take 1/4 or 1/5 of the harvest with them. So if they are taking 1/4, then 3/4 will go to the state's treasury, right? But if the cropper or the farmer puts everything, labor and the other uh, resources while harvesting, then 1/2, half of the harvest will go to him. So far as the private land is concerned, it is an obligation not to keep their land follow and pay a land revenue at the rate of 1/6 of the produce. So far as this private land is concerned, or a farmer is cultivating his own land, in that case, he has to, give the revenue. And what is that? The amount of that revenue? Now, 1/6 of the production will go to the state's treasury. So this is all about, Kautilya's on education. Now we will come to what is Kautilya's views on state. If one look back the pre-Kautilyan period, then one will find that the pre-Kautilyan theory of state was guided by the laws of Varnasrama, right? There are 4 Varna, there are 4 Asrama, and all these Varna and Asrama that was regulating the society, and society was regulating the state. It was similar to the early laissez-faire state in a mercantile economy of Europe in the early stage of industrial revolution, where a minimalist state was facilitating commerce and contract only. So the pre-Kautilyan state was a minimalist state. The way uh, you know the early Europe, or the economics of Europe in the early stage of industrial revolution, the kind of state was there. Pre-Kautilyan state was also that kind of state, where the nature of state is actually the minimalist state, and state is there to perform the minimum function. Now, in the post-Kautilyan period, the state could make its own laws when there was a conflict between the Dharma Shastra and Dharma Nyaya. The state started, rebelling. Dharma Shastra means basically uh, the society is the focus point of the Dharma Shastra. But in the post-Kautilyan period, Dharma Nyaya as a concept, it developed. That is something Raj Dharma, that is Dharma Nyaya. right? And dharma nyaya, the whole central point of dharma nyaya is the state. So when that a conflict arises between the society and the state, between the dharma shastra and dharma nyaya, then the state started, prevailing. Now, Arthashastra concerns itself with the secular economic activity and structure of the state and government. So, as I mentioned in the economic concept, one can sense that uh, everything was designed in a very secular manner, right? Uh, Everything was designed looking at justice at the center point. And the state and governments, it was also, organized, or it was also designed in a secular fashion. Now, to Arthashastra, there are 7 organs of the state, right? Saptani theory, that I have told you that Swami is the king, Amartya minister or high officials, then Janapada territory and population, then Durga, that is fortified town and city, then Kosha, that is treasury, Danda is actually the force or punishment, Mitra is the allies. All these organs are organically interdependent and interlinked. The source of the financial strength of the state was mining industry. The state exercises power because of its treasury. With the increased wealth and powerful army, more territory can be acquired, thereby further increase the wealth of the state. So king depends on minister, right? Then minister also depend on the king. So there is a interdependence. Then the population depends on Amartya minister. There is a interdependence. You can figure it out how there is an interdependence. Now Kautilyan state demonstrates high degree of functional specialization and structural differentiation. Government had 34 different departments, and the administrative structure of the 34 departments were by and large horizontal. The vertical chain of command and responsibilities is mostly left unarticulated. See, here Kautilya talks about 34 different departments. All the departments are guided by the principles of functional specialization and structural differentiation. And the operating model of 34 departments was horizontal, not vertical, right? So it is not command and obligation. It is all about cooperation and coordination. Those who failed in the 4 tests, as I mentioned earlier in the earlier class, dharma, artha, kama, and fear test, they were sent to the difficult posts such as forests, mines, and factories. So all these tests, if one qualify, then he he was or he is made as a minister or as a high official. If they fail, then difficult posts are given to them and they were sent to those difficult posts. Now, monarch or the king himself occupied the apex of the ministerial and bureaucratic hierarchy. Some argues Kautilyan state was politically centralized. Monarch and officials were enhanced by giving them considerable power. Monarch and officials were enhanced by giving them considerable power. The legitimacy of that power was to departure from the society-based justice system to the state-based justice system that is called the Rajadharma. Right? So, in the structure of the state, the king or monarch is the highest level, and below to it there are certain minister and bureaucracy. Right? And all those ministers and bureaucracy, they have the power. And what is the justification of that power? Now, the justification of that power is to do the Rajadharma, is to replace the society based justice system towards the state-based justice system, what Kautilya calls Rajadharma. This Rajadharma or statist bias is reflected in the conquest motivated temper. The state was having monopoly in some cultural and economic activities to the large extent. So Rajadharma not only indicates the prevailing of state over the society, prevailing of dharma nyaya over the dharma shastra, but also this Rajadharma is also reflected in the conquest motivated temper. The king has to expand his territory. If you are not expanding, then the other king will take away your territory. There is a difference between the Manu and Kautilya here. Manu doesn't talk about the expansion of territory, but Kautilya talks about expansion of territory. Lack of tight centralization in the state may be argued as the limits of human ability on the part of monarch to the work. So why there was a centralization? As I mentioned, that some argues that Kautilyan state was politically centralized, and Kautilya justifies this centralization is necessary so far as the ability on part of monarch to work is concerned. If there is no tight centralization, then it may create limitation of the king to maintain the state. The security and the stability, security of the citizens or praja and stability of the state, society and institution gets jeopardized if there is no tight centralization. Kautilya laid 6 basic principles of foreign policy. One is the pursuit of, and what are those 6 principles? The first, the pursuit of resources by Vijayaksh for the campaign of victory. That is the first. Second, elimination of enemy. Third, cultivation of allies and providing help to them. Fourth, prudence rather than foolhardy valor. Foolhardy valor. Fifth, the preference of peace to war. And sixth, justice in the victory as well as in the defeat. These are the 6 principles of foreign policy led by Kautilya in Arthashastra. The first is the pursuit of resources by Vijayaks. Vijayaks are the small king or the conqueror. Conqueror is the Vijayaks. Now, all these Vijayaks should have the pursuit. You remember Hans Morgenthau in the realist theory, right? So all this king or the conqueror, they must have a pursuit of resources, and they should always try to do war and dream for victory. Then the second principle is the elimination of enemy. So once you are eliminating your enemy, then you become a Chakravarti Samrat. If you are not eliminating, then your enemy will eliminate you. Then the third, cultivation of allies and providing help to them. So war is not always, suggested. You can also win without a war by developing allies, cultivating allies, and providing help to them so that it will add to your national power. Then the fourth is the prudence rather than foolhardy valor. Prudence means very cunning. The king or the conqueror should not be overconfident, should not miscalculate it. Rather than the conqueror should calculate what is going to lose and what is going to gain. That is called this prudence, the calculation of win and defeat. If the Vijayaks or the conqueror or the king does anything without calculation, then it is foolhardy valor. then the preference of peace to the war. If peace can work, then there is no need to go to the war. Then sixth, justice in the victory as well as in defeat. Right? So the Bhijuks must have the potential to give justice to himself and his praja in winning over a war and in winning and in defeating in the war. So whether it is winning or defeating, the king must give justice to his praja and to his kingdom. Now this theory of state in the Kautilya is known as the theory of Rajamandala, the circle of the state. So there is a diagram. You can see any diagram, right? I will explain. I cannot see the diagram here. The platform I am using, I cannot provide you the diagram. Right? So I will try to say and make you understand what that theory of Rajamandala is all about. You go to any book and search, see the picture of that Rajamandala, then you can ask me, I can answer. The first and the last word of the statecraft is the maintenance of the interest of political authority, what we call in modern language national interest. The first and last word of the statecraft is nothing but the national interest. Here Kautilya talks about the interest of the political authority, the maintenance of the interest of the political authority. So Kautilya is a realistic view. The second thing is the territorial polity, which should be under the governance of a political aspirant and ambitious, intelligent ruler who is capable of expanding his sphere of influence. So the second thing of this Rajamandala or circle of states is to have a Bhijuks king who should be aspirant, who should have aspiration, who is ambitious, and who is intelligent. And that person will do the territorial polity. And what is this territorial polity? Territorial polity is to winning over the other's territory, other people, to create trust among the praja of other state. Basically, the purpose is to expand the influence of your personality over others. The preferred political space is the Chakravarti Khetra. So there are many Bhijuks. Every Bhijuks wants to be the Chakravarti Samrat. So the preferred political space is the Chakravarti Khetra. It is equated with Prithvi, the subcontinental position. So the ultimate goal of a king, ruler, monarch, Bhijuks is to become the Chakravarti Samrat. Political power does not stand in isolation or political vacuum. It has its political neighbors and contemporary, which one has to deal. If the ruler likes to be the political aspirant, that takes us the understanding of Mandal theory or circle. That means that there are every small king wants to be the Chakravarti. Now you see, every small king has a territorial boundary and he has the neighbors, and there is a relation between his own kingdom or himself with the neighbor. So once you understand the nature of your neighbors and calculate accordingly, then there is possibility of for every Bhijuks, every aspirant king, monarch to become the Chakravarti. And what are those circles? The first circle is the Bhijuks, a small king. We are taking one king. There are many kings, there are many mandals actually. We will take one king and try to understand that mandal circle. So the first circle is the Bhijuks. Then the second circle is the Ari. Ari means enemy. So your neighbor is your first enemy, according to Kautilya. So if your neighbor is your first enemy, then who is your friend? The neighbor of your neighbor is your friend. So the first circle is the Bhijuks, second circle is the Ari, third circle is the allies, fourth circle is the Ari's allies, fifth circle is the allies ally, sixth circle is the allies of enemies allies who is territorially distant, seventh circle is the rearward enemy, eighth circle is the rearward friend, ninth circle is the friends of rearward enemy, 10th circle is the friends of rearward friend, 11th circle is the would-be conqueror, and 12th circle is the powerful than the would-be conqueror, indifferent king, that is called Chakravarti Samrat. Now this is the circle. I can show you the circle here, right? I don't know whether you can see it or not, but I have made my circle. Now Mandal theory deals with the interstate relation. Interstate relation is always related with the expansion of the empire, right? So when Kautilya talks about the interstate relation, basically he talks about the expansion of the empire. And expansion is possible through diplomacy and war. By these two means, the king should become the world conqueror. That is, when I'm saying world conqueror, basically it means Indian subcontinent. And the Chakravarti Samrat, the way Yudhishthir became this Chakravarti Samrat, that means Yudhishthir become the king of all, Aryabharat, what we call India, undivided India. That is the Indian subcontinent. Kautilya did not say that prepare for war and hope for peace, but instead prepare for war and plan to conquer. Right? So maybe Monu talks about that the king should prepare for war, but hope for peace. But Kautilya says that prepare for war and plan to conquer. The ultimate purpose of war is to conquer. The ultimate purpose of war is not the peace. That is difference again between the Kautilya and the Manu. Now it is good to have an ally. The alliance will last as long as it satisfies the self-interest. And what is the self-interest? The self-interest is the Chakravarti Samrat. So there is a function of ally. And what is that function of the ally? That is to satisfy the self-interest, and the self-interest is to become a Chakravarti Samrat. Whether one goes to war or remains at the peace depends on the advantage of the kingdom. So when one king is going to the war, then it is his advantage, and one king doesn't go to the war, then it is also advantage. So going to war or maintaining the peace, it depends on the advantage of the king. Nation always acts in their political, economic, and military self-interest. Times of peace have the potential to turn into time of war, allies into enemies into allies, and so this is Kautilya, and this is realism. And what is this realism? There is a political, economic, and military self-interest of the Rajya or the kingdom, and the peace, the time of peace, can be converted into the time of war. The allies may become the enemy may become the allies. Right? Then Kautilya talks about there are three kinds of war. One is the open war, silent war, and concealed war. Open war means when you are using arms and ammunition. Silent war is creating division by spreading false propaganda and mis or disinformation. That is silent war. Then concealed war. Concealed war is all about guerrilla warfare. I think I'm facing some problem.